The question a lot of people have, and particularly trying to look at, how do I become a better person? Or for a lot of people, again, with mental illness or people who don't have mental illness who are suffering, how do I reduce my suffering? And that mindfulness is a great way of doing that, even without the step of belief or explicit faith in Jesus. And I wonder, sort of, something that's been very interesting for me to wrestle with and think about in recent years has been virtue ethics, or the application of virtue ethics in psychotherapy. Like having people go through, like, okay, this is not a helpful thought, this is not a rational thought. Let's go through and replace that cognitive distortion, that deceptive brain message, with a true one, and that through practice, through effort, you can grow in virtue, at least to some degree. And so is that all Christianity is about, is becoming a more virtuous person?
No, that is not all that Christianity is about. But that is an important part of Christianity. But that question, very nicely, your segues are really good tonight. Leads right into this. I didn't know he was going to do that, so that was creative. I was saying, where is he going with this? And it went right up to what this Kierkegaard quote that I want to read about the definition of faith. So we're about to hear a very, very important, scripturally based passage about the relationship between faith and virtue, which is different than what you probably think it is going in. So, so in his book called The Sickness Unto Death, Kierkegaard, while writing about what is sin, one very nice little take-home line is, sin is not the turbulence of flesh and blood, but is the Spirit's consent to it. It's very deep, and that's very familiar. We've all had that. You've all heard that thought and had been preached that many times, but what can we really, sort of do with it to sort of have it enhance, our spiritual lives, rather than being, oh my God, Jesus help me. Although, oh my God, Jesus help me is really the big point. Because another thing that Kierkegaard says that I love is, if you're asked why you love God, be very, very careful if your answer is in the form, I love God because God is perfect. I love God because God is great. I love God because God is, the greatest of all true, but all things that are so far beyond our capacity that be very careful if you're saying that's why you love God. Kierkegaard, I think, very insightfully says there's only one really, really good reason for a human being to love God, because we need God. We love God because we need God. And why do we need God? Why do we need Jesus Christ? Because our spirits consent to the turbulence of the flesh and blood. So we're all dealing with this problem all the time, and the more we realize we're dealing with it all the time, the more we can say, I love God because I need God, and I need Jesus, and I need mercy, and I need help, and I need forgiveness. Okay, so in trying to define what sin is, Kierkegaard actually makes the very interesting decision that the best way to understand what sin is by trying, because it's just too hard to get a handle on. There's so much of it. He says, so let's try to understand what sin is by understanding its opposite. What is faith? Because if we understand what faith is, as we're going to see, there's a very good scripture on this that actually is Paul, that'll help us understand the relationship between faith, sin, and virtue. Okay? The main point here, Kierkegaard says, is that we can best understand a definition by sin by posing its opposite. The opposite of sin is faith, by which, and now I'm quoting, by which I steer in this whole book as by a trustworthy navigation guide. Faith is that the self, in being itself and in willing to be itself, rests transparently in God. Now, there's plenty to unpack in that short number of words, but I'm going to read the next paragraph, which is short and easy to understand, just to also to answer what David just said, and just because it's a new thought that you might not have had before. Very often, however, I'm reading Kierkegaard here, very often, however, it is overlooked that the opposite of sin is by no means virtue. In part, this is a pagan view, which is satisfied with a merely human criterion and simply does not know what sin is, that all sin is before God. No. The opposite of sin is faith. As it says in Romans 14:23, whatever does not proceed from faith is sin. And this is one of the most decisive definitions for all Christianity, that the opposite of sin is not virtue, but faith.